Tyler, so this week we got Andrew Kline from Workshop APD on the podcast. I actually met Andrew in Brooklyn a couple months ago when I saw that they were presenting with Madeira, who you know is a partner of ours on White Oak. They do all of our White Oak for pretty much all of our projects, but specifically our 45 White Oak project. They're doing all of the White Oak there. They had posted that they were going to do this panel on craftsmanship and seamless wood and materiality and things like that. And I saw that, and I'm a big fan of Workshop, obviously a big fan of Madeira. And I think I emailed them. I said, "Hey, what a great panel! Like, super excited. I might make the trip out." And James, who's with Madeira, wrote me back. He goes, "You want to moderate?" I was like, there was definitely like something in that email that I wanted out of, and that was it. And I was like, absolutely, I'll be there. And so I flew there in for the day and moderated, and we had a super cool conversation. But I was chatting with Andrew, and while I was chatting with him, someone walked up and was like, "Oh my God, Nick, like, I'm super excited to meet you. Like, listen to the podcast, big fan." And Andrew was like, he was like, "What was that about?" I'm like, "You don't listen to the podcast,
bro?"
And I think he like played along. He was like, "Yeah, of course I listened to it." And whatever, long story short, I was like, "You're going to come on." And he's like, no. And he goes, "You should have someone else on." I'm like, "No, I'm scheduling you to be on the podcast." And I think I emailed Catherine. I was like, "Hey, you get Andrew scheduled on the podcast." And well, here we are.
Yeah, it's funny. He was like, "What are we going to talk about?" She's like, "Don't worry, we'll figure something out." It also has to be interesting when you hop on a podcast and you're like, people know things about me and information about me and talking about my past, when you're like, "I don't know you at all. How do you know this?"
Right.
And then you're like, "I want to make sure that you know that the information is accurate and that this is who I am." And it's an interesting dynamic, but it was cool to talk to him. I like his perspective. I like his background, and like his college experience is a really interesting experience to me. I could get down with something like that, but his who he worked his graduate program or his master's program under, I think gave him some really, really wise words that I can relate to, which you'll hear about in the podcast.
Let's get into it. This podcast is brought to you by Andersen Windows. There's nothing more annoying than thinking that you're done with a job and getting a call back. Take comfort in knowing Andersen's 400 series are the windows with fewer callbacks and the windows contractors trust the most.
That's the result of decades of engineering and design excellence to deliver reliable performance every day with a variety of options to suit any home style and preference.
Tyler, I know you've worked with the 400 series windows before. How was the installation process for you?
Installing these windows is extremely easy. If you have any questions, you can hop on their website and they will give you explicit instructions how to install them. But every window for me, it's been unpackaging it, going through the normal flashing details, getting it installed, squaring it up, and it's been good to go.
Yeah, well, if you want, you can find more information and resources about 400 series windows, including sizing and installation guides at andersenwindows.com/pros. This podcast is brought to you by Buildertrend. This is the last chance to register for our upcoming webinar on September 24th. We're co-hosting with Buildertrend to share how you can keep your clients satisfied throughout the entire project and use their feedback to attract more leads.
We're walking through actionable strategies you can implement today to ensure every client leaves a 5-star review, refers you to their friends, and comes back to you for their next project. Plus, you'll learn why client satisfaction is key to success and the reputation of your construction company. Join us live on September 24th and bring all your burning questions. We're answering them live on the spot. Register for free at buildertrend.com/MC Happy Clients.
This podcast is brought to you by Velux. Homeowners trust you to get their projects done and to do them well. So it always helps when other industry experts have your back.
For over 80 years, Velux has been solely focused on developing innovative skylights trusted around the world. They've established themselves as the market leader in skylights by transforming spaces with natural light and fresh air.
Check out veluxusa.com/remodeler to find out how Velux brand can back your next build. Andrew, I cannot believe I convinced you to do this.
I was thinking today, what are we going to talk about?
I don't know. What do you want to talk about?
I thought maybe you'd have a topic in mind.
An agenda? No, not typically.
No,
cool.
we just roll with it. No, you know what? I truthfully want to talk about it. I think your role with workshop is super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think workshop in general is super interesting because it's architecture, it's interior, it's product, and it's brand.
Yep.
And I think that to a lot of people, those are very different things. But to you guys, you seem to have the best way to put it would be you have it figured out. And you and I chatted when I was in Brooklyn, and we were talking about hospitality specifically. And you guys had recently completed the hotel. I think it was was it Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard?
Yeah, we did one in Martha's Vineyard,
and that was, we had talked about that project, and hospitality for me is super interesting. And I forget if we talked about it, but I've talked about it on this podcast 100 times, if not more. But there's this book called Unreasonable Hospitality. Have you read that book?
I haven't.
So it's all about I think it's 11 Madison Park, the restaurant, the Michelin star restaurant in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically the rise of them getting the Michelin star and essentially what hospitality is and how to kind of uncap it in a way in different industries. And I've taken a lot from that book
Mm-hmm.
and really have thought, how building can be different and how it can be just a better process for the client. But you guys are doing that, in multiple disciplines, and you oversee a lot of it. So that's my long-winded answer to what are we going to talk about today. It's really all of that.
Well, I love talking about hospitality, so I think that'll be great. I think you hit on a couple really interesting things too. I love, as a builder, you're thinking about your customer experience. We talk a lot about having empathy for our clients and making sure that we're creating a great experience for our clients. And I think what I've learned working at Workshop is that we're in a service industry. So we have to think about ourselves as service providers, providing an enjoyable experience for our clients and a well-informed, efficient, fun experience, hopefully.
And I think one of the challenges that we're facing is that there is basically this predetermined understanding that construction and building a house and and even architecture is stressful, and you're never on time, you're never on budget. It's just the way it is. And I've had a lot of issue with that because even today, I've lost some really great projects to some other builders that are in my market that I know don't have a great client experience, but they have a 50-year, history. So they get the job because they've been along longer than I have.
Because they can walk people through some houses they built or something like that.
Exactly. And it's like, well, what about there's one in particular, here's a smaller builder, but there's one in particular I'll never forget. I had looked the job, we didn't get the job, and I ended up getting a call back to this job years later to come fix things. And I maybe not politely, but I declined. And I'll never forget, I remember reading, it got published, and I read the article, and it talked about how the project was a success. And it talked a lot about that. And I'm like, how wild is it to think that that's the story, like that everyone will read, is that architect and builder and project was a success story. When it wasn't in any way. The builder went bankrupt, the client ended up with a shitty product, but the architect, sure, got the design and it unfolded, maybe to what he wanted that you could capture in a photo.
Right. Well, I think you're hitting on a lot of really interesting things that I think a lot about when I think about the way the press talks about architecture or the media talks about architecture. Because how many times do you read a story and it's like, Joe, the architect, and Jake, the interior designer, did this project. And it's like, no, the interior designer had a team of 6 people supporting them. The architect had a team of 6 to 8 people supporting them. They also worked with all these amazing consultants who aren't even mentioned in the article. And of course, like, we've got the press and everyone who writes wants to simplify things so that they can be digestible. But what we do isn't simple. And so I think there's an interesting story there that sometimes gets lost with how many people touch a project, particularly on the builder side. Like, so I don't know. I mean, you're talking about how, maybe that project was called a success in this story just because people don't write stories about things not being successful in our industry. They generally want to talk about how beautiful a project is or the positive points of it. But I also think a lot about the team behind it and how can we showcase the partnership and collaboration and all the hard work of all the different craftspeople that go into these projects.
What type of project? So from like builder's perspective, just general public perspective, like the idea of architecture, it can be like you're saying a service industry where you're bringing this entire team on, consultants, interior designers, and creating this work of art. And also it could be more utilitarian. So what type of project do you find necessitates the type of design that you guys want to be a part of?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, I think many different project types. I think it's more about the experience the end product is looking for, whether or not we would be the right people to work with. Because like how Nick started the conversation with this idea that we really work at many different scales, it's more about thinking about the project holistically. So we work on residences, single family residences. We work on multifamily residences. We work on people's apartments. We also do hospitality, multifamily work, product design, and branding. And so we're really looking for people who care about the details, the experience, and want to, really get into it and have something that feels holistic and very well thought out.
Yeah. And I think that's like what a lot of people don't understand, even with our industry or as a builder or remodeler, that there's a difference between the experience, the build, the final product, and just, hey, we're getting this work done for the sake of getting the work done, right? That there's different types of contractors, there's different builders, there's different type of design firms, and then not everything is the same. Do you feel that what you got, like, are you guys able to, I would assume that most of your clients who are hiring you want the service, they want the white glove service, they want the approach that you guys have. Is there something that you offer or that you're able to offer where it's like more easier to manage for like let me see how to put this without, like, I was looking at your website and I was looking at how even on your LinkedIn and everything else, one of the things you said it's all over, but the built environment essentially is a tool to evoke emotions and meaningful human interaction. So it looks like you're approaching design and what you're doing from like an art perspective. And a lot of times there's a price that comes along with that. And I feel like that's reserved only for a specific person. Even with the collaborative approach and everything else. And I'm thinking of this not just for you guys, but for myself as well. But is there a way to bring a product like that to market where it's only, it's not only reserved for a specific person who can afford it?
It's funny. I was having this.
It was really hard to get there, but I was trying not to like. I just met you, and like, I was trying not to step on any toes.
Yeah, no, not at all. So I have that same thought process about my own life, right? Like I work for clientele we all at Workshop work for clientele who live in a very different lifestyle than even, people who design their spaces live in. And I think that's part of the reason I've always been interested in more public work and more hospitality work, is that everybody can go and enjoy this experience. Maybe it's just for, a 1 week vacation or a weekend away, but being able to create these high design, high touch point, high experience, high emotion environments for people who are not the 1%, who don't, have multiple homes throughout the world. It's kind of a double-edged sword with design. I have empathy for all of our clients. I don't think their lives are easier because they're richer. In many ways, I think they could be harder. And I don't think money buys you happiness. I think it does give you access. But I think it's hard for everyone in design to create these spaces that aren't always experienced by everyone, right?
Yeah.
I may never go back to some of the projects that I work on. They're only experienced by that family afterwards. And that's okay. There's a place for that. But I think when we're working on more public spaces, there's an access and accessibility to more people that really becomes exciting. And I started my career in retail design, and that was all about creating spaces that gave somebody a quick experience, signified a brand to them, maybe made them feel elevated, perhaps psychologically made them want to buy something. And that's the power of a space. That's the power of branding. That's the power of design. That's this lens through which we can sort of tailor an experience. But anyone can walk into a store, right? And anyone can feel that experience. So I hear what you're saying. I think it's very tricky. I'm also speaking very carefully because I don't ever want to offend anybody that I work with. And the fact that I've gotten to work for people who have such great resources that we can do amazing things is amazing. There's complicated feelings that go along with that when you return back to your 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn because you're in your 20s and you just worked a 12-hour shift, right?
Well, it's also like I look at it from a business perspective, and I look at what Nick does, what you're doing, and it's like you're trying to create art. And the business that you work for, you're trying to create art. And in my mind and in my experience, you're either creating art at a really high level for a lot of money, or you're creating art for no money. Like there's not really an in between. So like when you're positioning yourself from a business perspective in that like field, it's either you're working for nothing and you're doing everything for free because this is your golden egg that you're looking to birth, or you're working for a company that has, or you've established a company that has positioned itself in a place where they are able to work with the people that with the resources to be able to pay for it. And it seems like there's really not an in between, but it would be amazing if we could find a way to get to the in between. And I never considered like the public spaces, like you were saying, but that's like a great outlet for that.
Well, I think you bring up some really interesting topics that I've grappled with throughout my career too, is with the idea of being an artist. Because keep in mind, design isn't art. Design is commerce. Art can be commerce too, but art can also just be for art's sake. And I actually went to art school first, and I thought I was going to be a painter. And then I realized that I didn't want to have to do what you just described.
I didn't want to be poor.
I didn't want to be poor. I am business interested. I like business, but also I didn't want the sort of pain of getting to the top of an artist, the way that you described it. Once you reach that pinnacle, you're only creating art for the best galleries, for the wealthiest people. But it takes your whole career to get there. And so for me, design was business that could be creative. And I think that makes it more accessible, because all spaces need to be designed. And are you able to do the same thing with high-end residential that you are with a hotel? Depends on the hotel, depends on the ownership group. You might be able to do something similar. But I think there's so much so much amazing accessibility within our industry, as much as there isn't.
And I guess a lot of it is not seeing that perspective as well, where like design is commerce more so than art, and looking at your background and the work that you've done and the entire team around you, what they're doing. And then again, like this quote that your approach to it being this tool for communication, and to evoke emotions and meaningful human interaction. I look at that like more so as how do I do that in my job and still create a viable business? Because it seems like once you get into that market where it's like I'm doing this and it's less commerce driven, it's less business mindset oriented, and you're like, I'm doing this for the design sake, or to evoke emotion, or to pull at the heartstrings of certain people, whatever it is. It seems like it's really hard to blend that with creating like a viable business model. It takes a really long time to get there.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I didn't found Workshop APD. Matt Berman and Andrew Cochin did, and I was lucky enough to come in after they'd been going strong for many years. And
Sure.
they kind of embraced my talents and my perspective, and I was able to help with growth, but I didn't create it myself. So I'm not sure that I can fully comment on that, but I think if you approach every project uniquely and not with a one size fit all approach, you can find successes in it, whether that be a commercial success in a certain project or whether that be an artistic success in a separate project. And some of them will have varying scales of both. So I would challenge you to think in the gray areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to pull away sometimes the small successes and the small wins on some of the projects, just because they can be so challenging.
Yeah. I mean, we've jumped into a very heavy topic here, and I don't even know what you do. So what do you do?
I'm a contractor.
Oh, you're a contractor as well. Okay.
Yeah, I'm down. I'm in South Jersey, closer to Philadelphia.
Okay, cool.
We have some friends up in Brooklyn, and my wife's from North Jersey, like outside of New York City. So I'm familiar with where you're working and the challenges of being in Brooklyn.
Well, so our office is in Manhattan. I used to live in Brooklyn. I now live in Jersey City, but I split
Okay, nice.
Yeah, I split my time in the Catskills where I am today too.
Oh, okay. We're in the Catskills.
Sullivan County near Berryville, New York.
Yeah, so my wife is from Cranford, which is Union County.
Cool.
And then her parents have a place in Greene County, New York, kind of close to Hudson.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And Nick, you're Boston based?
Yeah, I'm in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
The earlier in the conversation, you were talking about kind of speaking lightly, not to offend people, and it has me thinking. We talk about being in this industry, whether it's architecture or building. We want to build the most elaborate projects, the most complicated or design driven, and oftentimes wealth and money is the resource to do that. And I'd like to think that as I grow as a builder, as I learn as a builder, that at some point or maybe along the way, I take what I learned from working, we'll just call it like working at the top of the wealth, and turning around and kind of plugging in what I've learned into more sustainable and more affordable homes. And I say that, referencing Ted Benson from Benson Wood, who builds these. Benson Wood is a custom home builder. They build these amazing prefabricated homes, but then he has, I think it's Unity Homes that,
Yeah.
He kind of talked about that on the podcast, where he says he's basically looking at every time he builds a custom home, like what can I take from that and systemize so I can plug it into a more affordable option. My where I'm going with this is we're relating what a lot of us do to art, and I'm curious at your thoughts as to whether or not that exists in the art world, where, Tyler, you said it's either when you're producing art, you're either working for the ultra wealthy, or you're making no money. Like, there is no in between level there. Is that, like, Andrew, is that something that you consider or have thought around in terms of, like, as you progress in your career, doing what you do?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
So for me, like, I guess I first asked the question around, like, does art itself have the opportunity to kind of, be a broad stroke between, working for the ultra wealthy and offering it to, the more affordable, from a more affordable sake.
And
But I guess
when you're talking about art, are you speaking more like fine
just
art, or are you using art as a broad term for like
as a broad
design
term, and I
creative?
guess, yeah, I guess going back specifically to you in what you do, and and being awarded the opportunity to work with such great clients and that have great resources to be able to produce, high quality part. Maybe you answered this
Yeah.
in the hospitality side, like,
Well, I'm picking up on it now. Sorry. I think for me, I think about it as when you're working on really high-end homes and you have a client who's incredibly detailed, you can work with them and improve your craft to a level and work with craftspeople at a really high level to explore ideas that you have at the nth degree, right? Having the best craftspeople brought on site to do crazy ideas that are artistic, to your point of view. I think those experiences elevate all other types of work that you do. And the way that I see that a lot right now is the conflation or the sharing of ideas from hospitality experiences into residential experiences and then back again. So our clients go on an amazing trip and they stay at this great spa. All of a sudden, I'm designing a private spa for them that's inspired by these really amazing hospitality experiences they had. And this gives us the opportunity to explore these ideas in a really beautiful scale. Later that year, I'm working on a spa, and maybe I'm sharing ideas with that developer and that hotel group about creating more intimate spaces within the spa because of this great residential experience that we've had. So I would say that all of these different types of experiences and different budget points of work can influence each other in a really fruitful way.
How do you balance that, like, taking inspiration from whether it's a previous job or something, and kind of starting from nothing? Like, when, yeah.
Yeah. So we work really hard to create what I call a conceptual lens or a narrative for every project so that we're not starting from nothing. So you've kind of hit on one of my favorite topics about design, which is this idea of storytelling. And I think, you guys were talking about how there's, in my bio, it says something about like evoking emotions and things like that on the workshop website. So for me, design is a series of decisions that are going to have to be made between a group of people. And that group of people could be really narrow, like a family, or it could be really large. It could be all the consultants and the owners and the stakeholders of a commercial project, plus their design side, plus their ownership group. It could be huge. But the only way you're going to get everybody on the same page is to create some sort of a lens for everyone to look through, and a conceptual lens is what I call it. And it really becomes a tool for making decisions. And I think it's the most fruitful when it's a story or it's narrative based. But it's a recipe. It could be a million different things, and designers do it in a million different ways. And I'm always curious, like when I go into a hotel or a hospitality experience, if I can kind of tell what their narrative was, if it's been successful, if it's come through the built environment. And so we try to do that really early. And we do that for single family residences too. It might be less elaborate because it might be more personal to the person, to the family. But many times it's been, it's been very much like a story that we've written with them. I think of this place that we finished in Nantucket early at my time at workshop. And she wanted it to feel like no other house on Nantucket. And so we went with this like boho was what we called it. It was this like Nantucket boho vibe. And I think that term's been really overused since then. But that allowed us to narrow in and do something funky in a space that doesn't get a lot of funky interiors. But for a hotel, many times it'll be like 3 different muses coming together. That hotel you mentioned on Martha's Vineyard Faraway Hotel, we really started with James Taylor and Carly Simon as our muses there. And this, that they spent time in Edgartown, that they may have even hung out in this hotel. And so if they were going to take over this hotel, what would the interiors feel like? And that gave us freedom to move away from this sort of New England aesthetic and bring in this history of like a 60s, 70s kind of vibe. And immediately allowed us to have more freedom on the interiors, be a little bit more playful, and get more eclectic. And sometimes that conceptual lens, might change a little bit as we move through the project with the team, but it really becomes important to get everybody on the same page.
So on a project like Faraway, what was the entire workshop team brought on for?
So we were brought on to do some site planning strategies because we were rethinking how you experience the buildings. It's a group of I think it's 9 buildings, some captains' homes that had been turned into larger hotel suites, a restaurant, a couple of restaurants, and a large hotel building. And so we came in and we did some master planning first. We decided that we wanted to move the pool. We wanted to blow out the lobby and really change the guest experience. Because previously...
So you're bringing, initially, it's like architects, engineers, all that stuff is the first step?
Yeah. So
okay.
We were hired to do master planning, architecture, and interior design on this. And we partnered with Mirka Ahern for the landscape. And then, of course, we had engineers, structural engineers, as well as MEP, and site civil people, great lawyers to help us get through the process.
Yeah.
And then the client team is very hands-on. Blue Flag Group owns that project. And they actually, for all of their projects, are super involved in writing the narrative up front.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So, and this is something that Nick and I face where, and I would, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't feel like there's like an ideal spot, or there probably is an ideal spot, but it's not like a one size fits all spot to bring like you into this situation where it's like, I feel that you have to develop the narrative some prior to having like the spatial layout and the engineering and the architecture. You have to have an idea of what you want, and then you're starting to develop that, and then writing the narrative, refining the narrative, where it's like this back and forth, and it's not like, well, let's get the entire design done and then let's figure out the narrative or the interior design package.
The narrative, hopefully, on good projects, and you can tell when it hasn't, hopefully it encompasses architecture and interior design. Right?
Sure.
So like that example we were just talking about, these are existing buildings in Edgartown that are beautiful, and we wanted to respect the exterior of those buildings. So that's why it was rooted in Edgartown. We weren't trying to bring mid-century ideas to the exterior. The idea was, this is about a place where Carly would have hung out.
Yeah.
This is what it would have looked like when she hung out there. How would she have changed the interior? What textures and colors would she have brought into this space? What kind of collected furnishings would she have brought with her? And how can we juxtapose those against the cool Georgian architecture of Edgartown?
And then how are you balancing like that with what you do and not having your, like, it's such a collaborative approach and there's so many people involved. Like, how are you how are you looking to alleviate doing things 2 and 3 times where it's like add a little bit of design, put your eyes on it a little, like how are you balancing that where it's not like the design's cooked, you come in, this isn't going to work, we need to change that? Like, is it just being involved throughout the entire process?
In the best case scenario, you're involved throughout the entire
Yeah.
process. Yeah. That doesn't always happen. I mean, we're really lucky that we've had a few projects where we're the architect and the interior designer on commercial stuff. That doesn't always happen. A lot of times you're working with collaborators, which can be awesome. But we've been in that situation where the architect's gone really far with something, and then we're brought in as the interior designers, and we'll be like, hey, we're sorry, but none of the rooms are the right size. They don't function the way they need to work, or things like that. And then you kind of back up. And it's important that everybody kind of be on the same conceptual page when you're speaking about materiality, particularly in hospitality environments where people are moving in and out a lot. So resorts, coastal environments where you're really having that indoor-outdoor living, because you want some of that consistency all the way through. But there's no
like perfect situation, or like,
you can still come up with amazing. I mean, we've all been in architecture that's very different from the outside, and then we go inside and we're surprised. And there's relevance to that too, right? There's no wrong or right in our industry. I think there's just, for me, it's about creating a story so that everyone can make decisions together and collaborate in a great atmosphere and move it forward. I mean, we have
that's what I feel like in order to generate a process that works over and over again is almost an impossibility when you do stuff like this, where it's like, we have a standard and this is how we normally work, but like, it's constantly adapting and evolving and kind of morphing into what fits for this project, which a lot of times serves to be challenging for me.
Well, but which is also kind of awesome because it creates a bespoke, unique project each time.
So you're speaking from a designer's perspective,
right?
But we're
right.
The contractors are like, screw this shit, I'm over it.
Well, hopefully by the time we're into drawing sets, we're working through our standards. I mean, we've worked really hard as a company to create SOPs so that our pre-designed presentations contain this type of information. Our SD1 presentation is this, our SD2 presentation is this, our SD3 presentation is this. Now, that's always a great guideline, but you can't let that stop creativity either.
So how do you prevent it from stopping creativity? Because I feel like in my experience, the SOPs, it's this weird balance of like enough information, but not enough. And I had a conversation recently with one of my teammates, like, and they're like, so this is how I do it. I'm like, well, this is where you start. If it makes sense to change it, that's fine. But here's your baseline of like how we're going to execute that particular detail.
Yeah. And what we do is incredibly personal. What we do is incredibly bespoke. So you just know that everything is going to be unique to each project. But I think processes can stay the same and you can still get very different outcomes.
So in what position, like, it seems to me that an ideal scenario for you guys would be obviously to handle architecture and design. Like, in what instances are people having architecture and, well, I guess using you for design but not using you guys for architecture? Is it like finding you after the design is already completed?
No, it's not usually after the design's fully completed. Maybe initial sort of architectural concept has been done. For instance, we did the one hotel in Nashville, and we were not the architects. We worked with LK Architecture on that. And we were actually brought in after the whole building had been designed to be a Hilton Curio, I believe was the brand. And then ownership had changed, and SH Hotel Group bought it and wanted to turn it into a one hotel before it opened. So we were behind the ball here. Like, we were late to the game.
Yeah.
And we had to jump in and just start running. And we were able, and at the same time, the architects were like, hey, how do we change this building to feel like this brand too, and to hit your narrative telling, your storytelling as well. So we were able to work together to kind of change what had already been put in motion. So like every situation's different, but I think so many times in hospitality we'll be brought in to do interior design but not architecture. A lot of ownership groups like to have two different companies working on design like that. There's a good working flow. Perhaps somebody is a better expert in one of those areas than the other. We've been lucky enough on some of our hospitality projects to do both, like the Faraway Martha's Vineyard, which was adaptive reuse. We weren't building new buildings; we were renovating buildings. Auto Camp Cape Cod, we did the architecture and interior design, and Auto Camp in the Catskills. So it just depends. Right now, we're working on some projects in Jackson Hole where we're the architect and we're not the interior designer.
Mm.
So that's kind of interesting too.
How are you determining like? I feel like I'm trying to relate that to what we would do. It's like I was asked to start a project and basically bring it to a certain point, and then they were going to hire their own subcontractors to finish it. And nothing about that seemed enticing to me.
Yeah.
You know, when someone's not buying the whole package, how are you guys determining that's right?
This was an existing relationship we had, so we felt very important that we continue working with these people because we love them. I think also it was, we knew who the interior designers were and we wanted to collaborate with them. We hadn't worked with them before, and as creative people, collaboration can be really fruitful.
Yeah.
I think the opinion of it throughout the creation of Workshop has changed too. Because,
Sure.
you know, if you talk to Matt and Andrew, when it first started, they didn't really have interiors in-house. And they brought interiors in-house because it was very important to them to be able to finish their projects to a certain level. And they wanted to see a consistency go through the architecture and interior design. That's why we brought in product design, which I helped to create at Workshop. And then also now branding. So designers are control freaks. I mean, we'd love to be in charge of all of it. But like we said earlier, it's not just art or commerce. It's art and commerce. In some projects, at the end of the day, you want to keep your team busy. You want to keep being business friendly. And so you can't expect people to hire to do all aspects of the project. So to be included in great projects at some scale, it's still an amazing project.
Hey guys, we're going to take a quick break from the podcast and remind you to head over to moderncraftsman.co. You can find out more information about us. You can download some freebies. We got a labor burden calculator as well as our pre-construction agreement up there. But most importantly is hit that subscribe button, sign up for our newsletter. This is where you're going to get all of the information behind the scenes. You're going to get information prior to podcast release. You're also going to get information on stuff that we're working on that we're just not sharing with the general public. So if you want to know more, head over, hit that subscribe button, or at least take advantage of the free downloads that we have on the website. So let's get back to the conversation. Do you ever think that it holds people back from reaching out to you guys in terms of, oh, they only do the whole package, so we're not looking for that? I think about when, like, people always ask me, hey, do you ever want to have in-house architecture? And part of me says yes. And part of me thinks that would be really fun. Like I really appreciate design. I think that we could do some cool stuff, but it's always followed up with like, if you do that, you can't work with other architects anymore. Like they're never going to give you any work. And there's some truth to that. Like obviously there's ways to navigate it, but typically if someone's design build, they're not working with an architect. They're handling that in-house. That's part of their sale.
I hope it doesn't stop people from reaching out to us, particularly when it's a commercial job. I think people are used to there being collaboration across that.
Sure.
I mean, we're going to work with a lighting designer on that commercial job, a kitchen designer on that commercial job. So I think in the commercial world, it's less of a problem. I think actually sometimes in the residential world, people want to bring in a decorator they've worked with before or a designer they've worked with before, right? Because they know how they live.
Yeah.
So it can be a plus or a minus. I have to admit, I think, and this is just again total control freak designer, some of my favorite projects have been the ones where we've been able to touch more of it because it feels like a consistent thread through it. But
I think that would be the easiest, like from a consistency standpoint and just everything being in house and your systems. That seems like that. Like if I could hire somebody, it's like, well, I could hire one person to handle all of it. And I understand what you guys do in the aesthetic and your program. And like, yeah, that works for me. That would be a no brainer rather than like, let's bring all of these different people in and then try. Because at the end of the day, I know collaboration and collaborative is such a buzzword right now, but like it can be really friggin' difficult. Like on jobs, it's not as easy. There's always challenges, and it's not to say that you're going to absolve yourself of all of those challenges by handling it in house, but I feel like it makes the process easier.
yeah, and I think, like I said earlier, there's no one right way to get to an amazing project. I think there's many different ways to get there. And I think you have to take into consideration where the project is, who's working on it, the scale of the project, and if it's right for that person to do the architectures and the interiors. Because there's still really great projects where we're collaborating with a different architect or a different interior designer, and they still turn out
So
great.
at this point, what are like your roles within the company on a day-to-day basis?
My role?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm an associate principal at Workshop APD, and I run a studio of architects and interior designers. I also work with our product designers, and I work on bespoke product for hospitality projects as well as things for workshop collection. And then
So you're working with designers to then source those products or get samples and then produce them for your hospitality projects?
for hospitality projects, and we also have a furniture line called Workshop Collection that's available to the trade.
Oh, nice.
Which are pieces that we've designed for our own projects that we want to make available to our peers. And we have a showroom in our office on the 12th floor. If you guys are ever in New York, let me know.
Who knew?
Now you know.
Where are you guys getting?
That's my Workshop Collection plug.
Yeah. Where are you guys getting? Obviously, you're getting most stuff. Well, not obviously. Are you getting most stuff made overseas?
No, we both domestically and overseas.
Nice.
Yeah, a lot of stuff's
India?
made in North Carolina.
Yeah.
We have a few things made in Vietnam. And then we have some various small things made in Minnesota, in Brooklyn. So it just depends on the product.
My
Andrew,
wife's in furniture production. She worked for URBN Anthropology for a long time. She works for Burrow now out of
Oh, cool.
New York.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's remote, but she goes into New York City, I don't know, once or twice a month.
That's great.
in terms of the product design, I meant to ask you this when I saw you, but like specific to furniture, you're designing a lot of this for, I understand the commercial side, but probably some of your private residential clients.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an understanding that whatever you design can and will be made available to others? And do you ever have pushback from clients saying you're designing this for me? I don't want you to produce this for anyone else.
I can't think of a time when that has happened. It is you're basically speaking about IP law at this point, right? And in our contracts, we do state that we own the IP of our product designs.
Yeah,
But like, we're in a service industry. If we're designing something for somebody and they ask us not to make
of course.
to replicate that and sell it across America, then we're not going
Right.
to do that. I also just want to
I mean,
point
wouldn't
out,
the cost be relatively prohibitive to be able to like get that made like at that? I feel like you're somewhat reducing the cost if you have the ability to then disperse that to a product line.
Well, I guess that's where I was going with my thought is, if I were to have a custom piece of furniture designed and made, say it cost me $30,000 for a table, and then you go and can mass produce this thing, it's like the reality is you could probably sell it for $15,000.
Well, I want to point out that Workshop Collection is not like as mass produced as
That's
some of the
fair. So
brands that you were
there's still
throwing
one
out.
of
There's
one.
still a
Yeah,
very like bespoke sensibility to the work. We do
that's fair.
stock some things like consoles. We'll have like 8 of
Sure.
those in stock or something because we had 8 of them made in the last run. But we're not talking about mass quantities. This is still to the trade. Many times the dimensions are customized and the finishes are customized because we're selling to other designers who are making it very bespoke for a project.
That's so much work.
Yeah, it's a whole business.
A lot of work.
We
like
have a whole
couple
team
of
working
pieces
on
of
it.
furniture.
Yeah.
That's insane.
And, we're new to the product world, but we've been designing it for years for our clients. And one of the things that I think differentiates us is that we do have people who specialize in product design in-house, particularly for hotel projects. When you're buying that amount of quantity of furniture, the guest rooms really call for their own unique solution. And that really needs to speak to the story you're telling and also to the brand. And it allows them to buy multiples of that piece. So it speaks to the budget of the project.
So you initially, you said you were going to school for art, and then I see you have a design degree, and then correct me if I'm wrong, but did you get a master's in some sort of architecture?
Yeah, so I went to art school first, Columbus College of Art and Design. I have a BFA in interior design. The first year, what's cool about art school is the first year you don't have to pick your major, which is why I wanted to go to art school. Because as I mentioned earlier, I thought maybe I wanted to be a painter. I quickly got nervous about how to be a painter and live. And I was always interested in business. My dad was a businessman, and so I'd always be kind of curious about what he was doing. And through conversation with him, he was like, I think you'd be interested in design because it's creativity and business. And so I thought I would go into fashion design. So my sophomore year, first semester, I was in fashion design. And I woke up kind of in a cold sweat over Christmas break and was like, I can't stand the people in fashion design. This is probably uncouth to say, but whatever, I'm going to say it. Like it's sort of this like vapid sensibility. And I think that's unfair of me to say about everyone in fashion. I have lots of friends who work in fashion, but there was this sort of, and maybe it was just in the time when I was going to school, it was the time of Project Runway. I don't know if you guys remember that. But there was sort of this like kind of like attitude and vapid feeling to fashion design. And I realized that I loved graphic design and I loved communicating about design, but I also loved space. And so as I was looking at the other majors in my school, I was like, wow, that's interior design, because I love how they put together these boards and these presentations that communicate an idea through graphic design and through 2D and 3D renderings of a space. And so I switched to interior design and was immediately like very happy with the decision, like felt like I found my spot.
It's funny you make the Project Runway reference, because I think it goes to what I was saying earlier, is that there's this like personality that you need to carry if you're going to be in fashion.
Maybe.
And it's the same thing I was saying, where it's, builders, it's seeming like the general consensus is that, construction's a mess, and no matter who you work with, it's going to be a mess, and builders are builders. They're going to change order you. Like it's predetermined.
You're all crooks.
Yeah. It's just like immediately
yeah.
predetermined.
I think that there is a stereotype in every industry. As an older person now who can look back at myself and laugh at myself, it wasn't
as an older person.
I'm older now. Sorry, I said that as a weird way.
as an older person,
as a grandfather. No, now that I've grown up a little bit, let me put it that way. Now that I've gotten a little bit older, I can look back at myself and laugh and say, like, yeah, fashion is a serious industry. I think
Mhm.
that I was maybe being unfair to the people in that industry. But the same
Sure.
can be true. Like people all the time are like, "Oh, you're an interior designer. You must like know the best spots in the city." And like there's this idea that I'm gonna like come in with a scarf around my neck and like wave my hands
An
around in
ascot.
and be like a certain way. I think there's an unfair stereotype associated with many different
Mhm.
creatives, and that I felt that a lot between architecture and interior design, that there was like an attitude from architecture to interior design when I was in school. And I was so glad to find out, or my experience was that it really wasn't like that in the real world.
So that was when you were going for design or when you were going for architecture?
So when I was getting my degree in interior design, there was always this like little voice in the back of my head that was like, is this enough? Will I be taken seriously with a
Yeah.
degree in interior design? Should I also study architecture?
And was that the reasoning for?
It was part of it. It
Yeah.
was part of it. It was also 2008. So it was a good time to go to grad school because there weren't
Yeah.
really any jobs. And I chose a architecture program that is probably the most interesting, I think, but unconventional to go to. I went to Cranbrook, where there's no classes and no curriculum. You write your own. It's independent study under an expert in your field. And you really create, it's supposed to be like the beginning of your own creative practice. And so for me, that was an amazing experience because I'm coming out of this idea of I'm interested in creating objects, I'm interested in creating spaces. What does that mean in the big academic idea of architecture? But I'm not interested in sitting at a computer all day and 3D modeling. I want to like build things with my hands. And at Cranbrook, you did that. Cranbrook is all about craft. And in retrospect, it was the absolute best place for me to be because I actually learned to weld. I built things. I made this thesis project that was like this little box that unfolded to turn any space into a living unit or
So
an
do you
apartment.
think that like that style of education contributed to your like design toolbox as far as what you were looking for from like an architecture perspective?
But I think what it did was it taught me not to live in a box, not to
Yeah.
think about like, oh, I'm an interior designer, I'm a product designer, I'm an architect. It allowed me to be like, I'm a creative person who can have great ideas at many different scales.
Mhm.
And so I wasn't afraid. And by the way, I graduated with this degree in these ideas and went back to the exact same job I had before I went to grad school
Yeah.
because there were no jobs. But it made me think like, hey, someday I don't want to just do one type of work. I don't want to just be in retail. I don't want to just work at this scale. And after working in retail for retail design, not on the floor of the stores, but designing the stores, I went and worked for Yabu Puschelberg, which is a high-end hospitality and retail design firm, more hospitality and multifamily than retail these days. And I feel like they approach their interior design very architecturally. And so it was stepping into another scale and taking on these challenges. But they also work down to the very level of custom furniture design too. And so I think that just allowed me to sort of free my mind from these boxes that maybe we put ourselves in.
So your I actually want to learn more about like that college program, but like were there traditional architectural takeaways and like learning that you feel you got out of that education, or was it like I know you said you created your own curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
At some point I would assume that when you're like, I'm going to go to school to get my master's in architecture, I want to be able to supplement this interior design degree that I have, legitimize it, whatever your thought process
Right.
was, and then you went for a more non-traditional approach. Did you get any of that more traditional architectural based knowledge through that program?
I did not take a structures course, if that's what you're asking.
No, not even that. Just like it seems that it was more like a very hands-on approach to what you were
I
doing. You're
think
creating your own. But
yeah,
I would,
I,
and I
I
would
got.
assumed. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think I got some of that through our group critiques. We would have a
Okay.
lot of visiting um, lecturers from other colleges. We would all come together and share our projects weekly or bi-weekly and have big discussions and really kind of that capital A academic architecture speak.
Yeah.
I think what I learned through that whole process, though, was that I'm not a capital A architect. No one's ever going to come to me because they want to know the best wall section and waterproofing detail, and that was okay because that's what made my career what it was.
But did you go into that knowing that, or was like
I knew that.
you did?
And
Okay.
and it was the hardest decision of my life, actually. Bill Massey was the architect in residence. And I sat there with him and I was like, Bill, this is like such an unconventional place to be. I'm so energized by it. But I want to legitimize the fact that I'm an interior designer. And somewhere in my head, that means being more technical.
Yeah.
And he had a very he was like, anybody can be technical, Andrew. Like, I think you've got to explore the more artistic side of architecture.
That's cool.
And you can always follow up with more education about technical abilities.
Yeah, because I feel like so much of what made you want to do that was to legitimize or back like those feelings that you were having.
Yep.
And then you went and did something and learned something that was completely the opposite of what you thought you were probably going for in the first place.
And what's funny is I still hang out with my grad school friends. Cranbrook's extremely small. They only accept 12 students a year into each program. In my year, they only accepted 6. And there's 5 of us still around. One student passed away. But we're still all friends. And it's funny because most of them ended up going into teaching. So they're all professors. I'm the only one who's actually like practicing.
Yeah.
And so they went a very theoretical route and they're shaping the minds of the future. But I kind of held on to the tangible. I needed to build things. I needed to see projects get done.
And your undergrad for interior design, was that a lot of commercial design?
Yeah, it tends to be more commercial. I think you do like one residence.
Yeah.
But you have to remember in the 2000s, that's when everybody was afraid of the term decoration. And all the interior designers were like kind of fighting to like be a little bit more recognized as professionals. So that's the time of NCIDQ certifications coming out and all of the certification of different education. So everything was based much more like on commercial projects. I think now, or I felt now, people are coming back around to really loving the term decoration and embracing the softer side of interior design as a skill set that not everybody has and something that should be more celebrated and elevated. But that's not what I felt when I was in education. It was very commercial and it was very hands-on. It was like, you can leave here and know how to do what you need to do to be an interior designer to get a job. And so to pair that with Cranbrook was really awesome because then I got to have this more craft-based, more artistic, more academic, big idea grad school with very like solid foundation for day-to-day work from my undergrad.
Yeah. I also, that's interesting that you say it was around 2000 that happened. My wife went to Drexel for interior design and she went from like 2003 until 2007, probably around the same time that you were in school. And it was like commercial based and spatial layout, and very hands-on, not a ton of like residential or decorating aspect of it. And there was like a clear line drawn in the sand between being an interior designer and being a decorator. And I still think today there is to some point. But I didn't realize that was really like associated with a time period that things somewhat changed.
Yeah. I mean, it's another box, right? We try to separate our industry into architecture, into interior design or interior architecture, and into interior decor or decoration. I don't know. I'm not that interested in that. I'd rather bust through all of that shit. I want to pick the pillows and work on the
So,
facade.
so what do you feel about interior like designers who don't have a formal education or background in interior design?
Well, some of it's magic, right? Like some of what we do is, like you called earlier, art. I think that I don't know. I'm not so black and white when it comes to this stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
think that um, I'm completely inspired by peers in the industry who do things that surprise me. And I think a lot of times people who come from other industries and this is a second job, or people who maybe aren't formally trained, do something more innovative and interesting because they haven't been told how to do it.
Mm-hmm. I, I I agree with that. We worked with an architectural designer because they're technically not an architect,
Right.
and I remember being at an event and we were talking about our projects, and I was sharing the project that we were building, and this woman who was an architect was looking at it and goes, "Oh, they're not even an architect." I
Mm-hmm.
said, "Well, no," and just like literally discredited the project. Like it didn't like it no longer mattered how well it was designed or anything else. All that mattered was that that person is not actually an architect.
Yep.
You know, I went to school, I got and I'll never forget. I'm like, what does that matter? Like your opinion, if you didn't know that, your opinion was going to be wildly different.
Yeah. I don't
And
know. I mean, I got a little bit of that when I was interviewing for architecture programs. There's not
yeah.
a ton of people who get a degree in interior design and then go get a master's of architecture, which,
Hmm.
by the way, was like the best advice I ever got was like, go get your grad degree in something related, but a little bit different
Mm-hmm.
because it opens up your thought process. And there. I remember we were interviewing at RISD, and I was talking about my feelings about like the interior architecture program there, and would that be a better fit for me? And one of the professors was like, "I don't even understand why we have an interior architecture program. That's not a thing." And she was like, if you want to do architecture, you need to do architecture with a capital A. And I was like, well, guess RISD is not the place for me. Like gross. Like this very brilliant woman can't see that there are wavy lines between these boundaries. Like the most interesting creative work always happens a little bit on the outside.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
there's a place for both of it. I get it. Like, you know, architecture is such a broad term by itself. You
Yeah.
know, you have the going back to it, something we talked about earlier in this conversation is starting from nothing and you kind of communicating how you start with a brief and there's this project narrative. And I think, there's some architects that will literally never visit a site, give you a plan to build a house, and it works. You plop it on the plan, you move it around on the site where it belongs, and you grade up to the foundation level you need, and that's what you end up with. And that's fine. Like there's the majority of the population would be just fine with a house like that. But then there's the more I'll say the more considerate or more intentional design.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes to back to one of my favorite quotes is that constraint breeds creativity.
Yep.
And I think about our 45 White Oak project. The shape of the home is L-shaped. It's not the best shape to build. It's not the most efficient, but that was the constraint that we were bound to for the setbacks. And without those setbacks, what would have been our constraint? Like what would have been the house?
Yeah.
And I remember seeing that process unfold over sketch after sketch with the architect, and realizing that how much that particular constraint led to what is inevitably the creative outcome.
do do you feel, and I'm kind of going back to the conversation that you had with your graduate professor, um who you were studying under, and he said that essentially, like, you could always circle back on the technical aspect of the trade.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think that, and it's very relatable to what we do, but I feel that it's far easier. Like, that can be a learned behavior. The technical aspect of what we do, I feel that you can teach anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that having like the artistic eye or like the bones for design is something that sometimes cannot actually be taught. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there's elements of design that can be taught,
Sure.
but I think
Like theory and stuff like that.
yeah, I mean, I got interested in creative stuff because my grandfather was an artist, so my mom was always like putting me in drawing lessons or like so maybe it's something that comes from your childhood or
Mm-hmm.
creativity of people around you that kind of breeds that. It's more of an innate sensibility. I have to admit too, like the older you get and the more you learn about yourself, I'm not sure I could be taught all of the technical things. I don't know that I have the patience for it. I get to work with some of the most brilliant technical minds. And thank God they're doing what they're doing because they can see detail in a way that I can't.
Yeah,
And they
and
have the patience for it.
the patience, and I think the patience, like the patience to build the experience and to make the
Yeah.
mistakes and like
And that's
understand it.
why it's a partnership.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't think it's ever one person who can do everything. So I hope I can bring creative energy to the project. And I love being surrounded by people who can bring really smart technical skills to the
yeah,
project.
I even look from like a general art perspective where it's like, I think that as you see somebody progress in their career, whatever medium they're expressing themselves through, where it's like, okay, they have their own style and then they have some sort of like training or mentorship, and then they're taught theory. And then it's like everything's so clean because they're being so intentional and they don't have like the confidence in themselves. And then as they gain more experience and as they become more comfortable in their own skin, their art actually like loosens up
Right.
some,
Yep.
and there's like
Mm-hmm.
imperfections within their art, and then it becomes their own style. And it's like, okay, now I can tell that this is so and so's rather than like this clean, absolutely perfect, no line, no brushstroke, out of place piece of art, which like I feel that could be taught. But then like having the confidence to have imperfections in your art and really have it like evoke your own emotions, like you said, I think takes a lot of time, a lot of experience. And I think that that's something that's very difficult to teach people.
Right. I want to be clear though that like I'm not really interested in design for design's sake. Like
Mm.
even though I'm not a technical person, I do like to build. Like I like DIY building. I work on my house a lot. In grad school, I built things. I like craft. I like things that are built well and beautiful. And so I just want to make that while I love being more on the creative, maybe conceptual starting point of the project, I love seeing things complete and be built
Sure.
and being a part of that process too. Because there is a whole side of architecture that we don't need to get into on a podcast with people who build things where it is all theoretical architecture. And that is has a place and it's an academic sensibility. But what is so magical to me is creating spaces.
Absolutely.
Well,
And go
yeah.
ahead, Nick.
I mean, when you say that, Andrew, obviously you're on the design side, but and I understand the DIY, but in your client projects, what does I mean? You're busy, like you oversee a lot at workshop. So
Mm-hmm.
when a project is being built, whether it's a piece of furniture or a house, what is
And
how do I
yeah,
say this?
I'm not the day-to-day contact.
No, I know. Oh,
Yeah.
I know that, but I guess what I'm asking is like, what's your for lack of better terms, your happy place? Like if you
Mm-hmm.
could choose, like
Mm-hmm.
you get to work. Are you in the office overseeing something, or are you on site seeing it come together?
Both. I think the beginning of a project, there's so much optimism and excitement, like that initial sketch or the initial which I don't think people do enough anymore because we all kind of got digital during the pandemic, but like sitting around the table with like 3 people and brainstorming on a site plan after you've walked the site and gone back to the office, like that spark of energy, that is definitely my happy place. I love space planning. I love drawing floor plans. I always have. Like as a kid, I would draw like crazy floor plans and stuff. So that's definitely my happy place. But I can't separate myself too, because the moment you walk into, you know, a recently framed great room and you think about what's going to happen on that far wall, that's an amazing experience too. So I can't give you an answer. I love it all. I've been very lucky to be able to work on projects that actually got built. I have many colleagues who work on projects for years and maybe they don't get built, or very technical large projects that, you know, get stalled. So I love it all, but
I have a question for you that could probably help a lot of our listeners. And I know that you're not necessarily boots on the ground day to day with contractors, but like from a collaboration perspective, what is one thing that you think or a few things that contractors could be doing to improve the contractor designer relationship?
Clear communication, like upfront, knowing that we're partners in this and having each other's backs is the best. And I think that happens a lot. We work with some really talented folks and we have a great relationship like that, where we can even start to have a conversation before the CDs are done, looking at design together and talk about solutions to make it happen within the budget or within the constraints, whatever it is excellent. I also think that contractors have to realize that they, like you said at the beginning, Nick, that they are a service provider. And we all know that if we're not communicating costs as they happen through the project to our clients, that everyone's life is going to get harder at the end of it. And when you work with a contractor who does a monthly budget update or buys out the job early in the project and gives clarity to the design team of where we are in the budget, every decision that has to be made, every interaction with the client is cleaner and better for everyone involved after that. And I often have thought that contractors could work on the way that they present information better. We spend so much time thinking about how we're going to prepare a presentation to talk about the design of the building, putting an effort into talking about how you're going to speak through the process and the costs associated in a very digestible way, and then making sure you do it frequently. That's just going to make people trust you at such a higher level. And isn't that the most important part of what we do for our clients? We build trust with them.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people would argue and say, no, that's not the most important. The most important is that we build the house.
And you're never going to get to build the second house if you don't build trust.
Exactly. And that goes right back to, you know, the beginning of this conversation around hospitality. It's something that, you know, you're setting the foundation. I think you're spot on, Andrew, is that, you know, we as contractors typically do a pretty lousy job presenting to a client as to like, hey, this is what we're doing. And because it matters, it's not, hey, let's just put together a budget and we'll share the budget. And, you know, you can tell me yes or no if we're going to proceed. It's way more than that. It's, you know, it should be an enjoyable experience. It shouldn't be just a delivery of information. And I think a lot of times it is. And that's a big reason why, you know, I know we talked about it in New York, but it's why we put such a heavy emphasis on pre-construction. Pre-construction is, you know, it's becoming increasingly popular, which I appreciate, but it is what allows us to even have the potential of having a successful start.
I think more clients would engage in pre-construction if they realized that it would allow them to get more of what they want at the end of the project, right? Because if we're working together earlier, you can say, hey, we're trending too high for this client's budget. And then we together can make some really smart decisions to give them the look they want, or to take out something that they might not have even realized was in the project that isn't going to affect their day to day, which could be like I don't know, maybe a window type, and really be able to build something that they're going to love just as much. So I would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important process. We just went through this recently, actually on 2 projects. Both of them were tied to the HVAC systems, and we one of them, which is in design right now, we're in this meeting for 45 minutes. We're talking about we can't fit 3 condensers on the roof, and they're going around and around. What if we put it here? What if we make the roof larger? And at some point, I just said, why do we have 3 condensers? And they were, they start going through the explanation, and they were like, well, the heating load is really high. It's like, I think we're asking the wrong question here. We're asking, how do we fit 3 condensers? Why not ask the question on how do we get rid of a condenser?
Yeah.
Because like, if we reduce our heating load, we're reducing a condenser, and we're making, that means we're not only reducing equipment, but we're also making the home more efficient. Is that correct? And I find that, without pre-construction and without focusing on this in the early days, where, what happens is something gets designed and then the builder's on site and it's like, hey, we don't have the time to go backwards.
Yeah.
Like, put 3 condensers.
Exactly.
If they don't fit, oh well. And, the home is as efficient as it was designed. It wasn't this process of finding out, hey, how do we, I guess what my point here is, like, that pre-construction is not just how do we build it, but how do we make sure that we're building the best product.
The best product, and also that hits the budget. Because if you have
of course,
time to actually work through that, because I would say to you, and maybe I'm sure your projects are so well organized, you never have cost increases.
They're perfect.
Nope.
Yeah. But wouldn't you say cost increases happen because you're trying to hit a timeline, and there was never a chance to catch up and do the actual research you needed to do to get the right pricing?
No, because someone's sitting with a pen in their hand and says, can you do this in 12 months?
Yeah.
And that pen's not touching the paper unless you say yes. And it's like, yes. And then you go back and you're like, all right, guys, we need to figure out how to do this in 12 months. Like, impossible. Windows are 14 months out. Like, it's kind of foolish that it's taken this long to realize that. Because I mean, even I've been in business for 10 years, and that was always the mentality when we started. It was like, yeah, submit a price, we'll compare, and then we'll let you know if we want to work with you. And I've just taken a very hard stance that we're not doing that. You work with, you interview, and you find someone that is a partner to the project, that it will work with you to bring the project to a successful start. And and that's not just the homeowner, that's you guys, the architect, like, that is the design team. You need to look at me, and the homeowner needs to look at me and be like, yeah, that guy is going to bring us to a successful project start, on time, on budget, and we're confident behind that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with, like you said, establishing the trust between the design team and the contractors is definitely communication, and like financial communication.
Yep.
Even just like the impact. And I think it takes a while to develop the rapport. Like, it's harder when you first start developing a new relationship with the designer, but it's like the impact of decisions or deliveries or changes, and like how that impacts the contractor, how that impacts the design team, and communicating to each other, like what this actually does on the back end, instead of just like not saying anything, going through with it, building resentment, and then not going to them to communicate properly, because it's like, every time I say something, it costs me this much money.
Yeah.
Which I think, like, the more you work with people, the easier it is, and the more you have the team approach. I think it's when you first it's like dating. You're trying to figure out how it all works. And I think that the more transparent you can be, the more open and it's the same thing with customers too. It's like, be as transparent as possible, be as open as possible, over communicate if you have to. And I think on the back end, when that happens, everyone understands how this is supposed to work. And when things aren't working, you can bring your heads together to try and come up with some sort of solution.
It's funny, like we tell ourselves, this isn't brain surgery, but it is hard. What we do is hard. It's a lot of communication. It's a lot of people involved. It's a lot of moving parts, and it's someone's life savings.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I've never operated on a brain, but like, honestly, when you think about like what goes into that and how many people and like the length of that surgery and everything else, right? Like, I feel like we're dealing with a lot.
It's
and
a
it's
lot
not
of
in a
communication.
sterile environment.
Way more people,
and it's
way longer of a time.
It's not in a sterile environment. Like, you're probably not getting cream of the crop showing up to the job every day, where it's like, if I saw a roofer come to prep me for surgery, I'd be like, yeah, there's no way.
Do you think surgeons are in the operating room? Guys, this isn't house building.
Yeah, probably.
We got
this.
This
isn't construction or design.
Dude, I guarantee if they saw it though, they'd be like, screw this, I'm operating on brains all day long.
I appreciate your point of view.
Yeah. We appreciate the perspective, and I'm glad that we got that last little touch point there, because I think it is really important. And I think that at the end of the day, a successful relationship is built so much on communication and not just creating a beautiful space. Like, it is about the experience, and it is about being in a service industry and hospitality and everything else. And everyone has to leave that project happy for it to be a truly successful one.
Yeah, you have to have empathy for your client. They don't know how to do this, right? Mm-hmm. So it's new and scary to them. So having trust with them and guiding them through a million decisions and a million touch points with the builder, with everyone in their pockets, that's a tricky thing to do.
We should have been brain surgeons. Shit.
That was never on my short list.
No, but thinking about it now, I feel like it'd be way easier than this.
I don't know if it'd be creative enough.
I would go to, what school did you go to? What was your graduate school?
Cranbrook.
I'm going there for brain surgery. I'm just going to make up my own curriculum. I'll be good.
Yeah, you'll be good.
You can teach me the technical shit later.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
My career at a snapshot.
Yeah. Andrew, appreciate you being on, man. I'm happy that we got this scheduled. I was excited to meet you guys in Brooklyn and moderate that panel, but to have you on the podcast is super cool, and excited to hopefully find a project together soon.
I'm sure we will, and it's going to be great.
Have fun in the Catskills. It's going to be beautiful up there very shortly. It's that time of year.
Yes. Thank you so much. Great to meet you both.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well. Guys, what a good way to end that podcast, talking about pre-construction and tying it back to what we promote constantly. And if you guys haven't already, if you go to moderncraftsman.co, hit the extras button, we actually have our pre-construction agreement up for free to download. And that is what Tyler and myself use to bring a client into pre-construction. You heard it from Andrew. It is becoming increasingly more valuable to the overall experience. And yeah, I mean, shout out to Unreasonable Hospitality, that book. I hope to get Will on the podcast because, frankly, I think it was one of the more eye-opening books I've ever read. But yeah, good conversation there.
Yeah, I always appreciate having some design perspective and finding out how they do their job. I always think it's interesting, like going from concept and just pulling ideas out of the air and then getting a design on paper, and how you, like, my brain doesn't operate that way. It's more analytical, and being able to, like he said, create a space based on somebody's experience is super interesting to me. And then I just love getting insight for how to better collaborate with different companies. Like, it's a buzzword. Everyone wants to say it right now, but nobody wants to talk about how difficult it can be and the challenges that come along with that. So I think it is important to address that some and figure out what we can do better to create like a more seamless process.
Talk to you guys next week.